Hello, I'm Patrick Varley, the technical lead for tools. Today I'm going to be talking to you about backup architecture, what makes a good backup, and what strategies to use when backing up Couchbase. Later on, my colleague Carlos will be talking about the backup service, which is new in Couchbase Server 7.0. So why do we back up? It seems like a quite obvious question. But as the industry moves to the cloud, there are more attack vectors, and the most common one that we're seeing industry-wide is ransomware. How long can your business survive without being able to function? How much money is your business willing to spend on ransomware? Beyond just the simple malicious attacks, the people inside your business are human and can make mistakes. Human error is one of the leading causes of business loss. So having a safety net of backup is important. Finally, auditing. There's a number of different industries, financial, medical, that requires keeping data for a long period of time. And it doesn't make sense to keep this data within the database itself. That can increase costs and slow down the actual operational database. So backup's a great solution for this. Like any system we build to solve a problem, there are always requirements, and backup's no different. The two main points when thinking of a backup solution is recovery point objective. This is at what point we can recover the database to. So for example, you might be like, I would like to recover my database to Tuesday last week. The other point is recovery time objective. This is how long it takes to do the recovery. So if the recovery takes too long, this will have an impact on your business. Finally, it's understanding that backups use resources. So you need to understand how long a backup will take and what effect they have on the current system. What makes a good backup? So the age-old industry standard of the 3-2-1 method, which basically means you have 3 copies of your data stored in 2 locations, and one of those locations is completely offline. So for example, you'd have the active copy in the database, that's one copy of the database, and then you create your backup, and then you make a copy of the backup. That'll give you your 2 backups, and one of those you would want off-site. So if you're running in a normal data center, one of your offline locations could be, say, S3. But if you were in the cloud, then S3 wouldn't be considered as a off-site backup. This is basically the bare minimum needed to have a good backup. Some companies will demand greater levels, and even to the extent of writing their backups to tape and having those tapes completely offline, off-site. When thinking about your backups, as they're used to protect against malicious attacks, it's important to understand who has access to your backups too, so you can guarantee that only the people that need to have the ability to access them. So backup strategies. Backup strategies are pretty personal to the business. Each company will have a different strategy as it's defined by what's important to that business. So for example, how often you need to back up, at what point do you need to restore to. These are all the things you need to think about when making a backup strategy. The most common and basic backup strategy is one where you would do like a full backup once a week, and you do incremental nightly. That gives you the ability to go back daily. But in some cases, you might want to be more fine-grained and take backups at a more regular period. Once you have all these different backups running, you can be using quite a large number of disk space. So now you want to think about the backup lifecycle, like how long do you keep backups for? This is only not important for the points we raised earlier about a recovery point objective, but also to do with data compliance regulations around how long you keep someone's data for. So going back to our simple strategy of doing weekly and nightly, once you have a few of these, you might decide that actually once I get back a few weeks, I don't really care about the dailies for each of those weeks. I only care about the weeklies. So in that case, you might go, I only want to keep the weeklies for the last 4 weeks. And then after that whole month's gone past, you might decide, for the monthlies, I only need one backup per month. It's unlikely that I'll need to go all the way back to a precise date. So in that case, you would look at deleting those backups, or in Couchbase side, you might decide on merging them. So there's different methods to meeting your backup strategy. You have full, incremental, and merging. A full backup is the most basic. It takes the full backup of all the data in the cluster. However, that's slow. Another type of backup is incremental. Incrementals are pretty much deltas. They're quick, but to restore them, they need the full set of backups. So they need to be built on top of a full backup. And finally, in Couchbase server, you have the ability to merge backups together. So you can merge your full incrementals together to create one big backup. This process allows you to recover disk space and also can increase restore time. So the main building block for backups in Couchbase server is CB Backup Manager. CB Backup Manager was added to Couchbase server 4.5. And since then, a large amount of work has gone into making it high performing. We can see that the performance has improved remarkably over the versions. CB Backup Manager is built on top of DCP. DCP is the glue that binds Couchbase server together. It's used by all of the services, indexing, XDCR, analytics, and full text search, to move data around Couchbase cluster. CB Backup Manager supports full incremental backups. It's also highly flexible and configurable at both backup and restore times. You can select which services you'd like to back up, which buckets you'd like to back up. It can also do document level filtering at both the value and key at restore time. It also allows the modification of expiry. This can be quite important if you're restoring an old backup and you're sure that the data has expired. You can overwrite the expiry so that data is still accessible in the newly restored cluster. And there are many other options for CB Backup Manager. So restoring. A lot of the time people focus on backup and they kind of forget about restoring. I would go to the extreme measure of saying that you do not have a backup plan unless you test restoring regularly. Restoring is really important, and testing it regularly is a good idea, as it allows you to get used to the process. It also allows you to understand if you can meet your recovery time objectives, see how long the restore takes. This can be really important if you've got a data set that grows in size consistently, because it might get to a point where the hardware that you spec for your backup solution at the beginning doesn't meet it when the data size gets bigger and bigger. In CB Backup Manager, when doing a restore, we use conflict resolution. This is the same conflict resolution that Couchbase Server XDCR uses. So when you're restoring to a new cluster, as expected, it will restore all the data. However, when restoring to an existing cluster, conflict resolution comes into play. There are two types of conflict resolution in Couchbase Server. There is last write wins and revision-based conflict resolution. These are set at the bucket level, and backup will use this, and it will be decided which version of the document should be restored, the one on the cluster or the one being restored from the backup. These settings can be override and you can force the restoring of all data if required. So as you can see, backups can become quite complicated, quite hard to manage, and building a strategy can take some time. With this in mind, to help our users with this, my colleague Carl is going to talk about what we've got designed for the future, the backup service.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm Carlos, and I'm going to talk to you about the backup service. The backup service is a new service we've been implementing for the last year, which will let you effortlessly manage backing up your cluster in a few clicks. The backup service, the reason we made the backup service is up to date. We don't have any way of automating backups. As Patrick mentioned, everybody should be running backups frequently and in an automated manner if possible. This will let you avoid disaster. The backup service will let you do exactly that. It's built on top of CB Backup Manager and does everything CB Backup Manager can. It will allow you to set up automated backups, merges, and it will allow you to restore your data from the administration console. It also has a REST API for you to write your own scripts to automate the process if you want. Like any other service, you can just add a new node to your current cluster that has the backup service, and in a few clicks, set up your repositories to back up your data. You can also see all the backups that have run in history and see and look at your data from the UI. As I mentioned, the service is built on top of CB Backup Manager, which means it's compatible with it, which means we can use cloud, we can do examine, we can do info, we can do merges. And in case of failure of your cluster, you can actually use CB Backup Manager to recover the data that's been stored. One of the central concepts of the backup service is centralized storage. What this means is that the backup service requires you to store your data on some centralized storage, which is away of your cluster. This means in case of the node failure, you can still access your data. Without further ado, I'm just going to run you through a quick demo of the backup service so you can see it firsthand. Here I have a development cluster. As we can see, we have a node that's running the backup service. Just below the backup tab, we have a new tab called backup. If we click it, we come to this new window where we can see we have two tabs called repository and plans. These are our two new units for the backup service. Repositories, like in CB Backup Manager, are the container for your data where backups run and where you can actually access your data. This includes seeing how many backups you have or examining your data. Plans is a new concept. Plan allows you to group steps of tasks to be done by the repositories. What this means is you can schedule like backups, you can have backups every day, make them full, merges. The backup service comes with some inbuilt plans. These are the daily backup plan and the hourly backup plan. So for example, the daily backup plan has a backup every day of the week where the Mondays are full, and then it merges it at the end of every week and also merges everything together at the end of the month. Plans allow you to reuse these steps for different repositories. So you can have different buckets being backed up with different plans. Let's go through the initial workflow. I already have a repository set up, but let's ignore it for now. A new user would just have to click Add Repository. At this point, they can select a plan. They can either select one of the already built ones, for example, daily backup, or they can create a new one. In our case, we're going to use the fast backups plan, which is a plan I have made beforehand. This does backups every 3 minutes. It's a bit unrealistic, but probably no one wants to stay with me for an hour just to see backups run. So we can click Next and just give some details for repository. We have to give our repository a unique name. For example, in this case, I'm just going to call this be a sample repo. We can select a bucket, for example, the be a sample. If we were to leave it empty, it would back up the whole cluster. We can also back up to S3 by clicking on cloud, but at this moment, we're going to use the file system as I don't have a cloud bucket set up at the moment. We must give it a location. So in this case, I'm just going to give it a location in my local file system. Be a sample, for example, and click Add. We can see here a new row has appeared, and if we expand it, we can see a bit more information. We can see that it's backing up the bucket be a sample that is using the fast backups plan, and that the next backup will run at 4:34, which is approximately 3 minutes from now. Furthermore, we can actually see that where archive is in my local machine, as well as where the repository is, what services it's backing up, how many backups, and the size of the backups. Currently it has 0 backups as it hasn't run. If we want to trigger a backup immediately, we can by just clicking the backup button. We can choose if it's going to be a full backup by just clicking the tick box and start the backup. Immediately we see the status change to running a backup, and we get some confirmation that it's running. If we click on tasks, we can see that a backup is running, and if we click on data, we can see how our backup is currently being created. When the task is finished, we can see here it gets added to the history. You can see when it started, when it ended, how long it took, how many items it transferred. This is our current state of our backup repository. We can see we have 1 backup that's full, it's 18 megs. And if we expand it, we can see the number of mutations, tombstones, indexes, views, the size, as well as events and full text aliases that we have backed up. This repository is not particularly interesting with only 1 backup, so we're going to go back to the one I had prepared beforehand. We can see here that this repository, the GameSim repo, appears yellow. What this means is that this repository is paused, which means it's not actually currently running backup. We can resume it at any time, and we can see it automatically schedules the next backup. We can now look at the history of this repository. We can see that this one has run more tasks. We can see there's some backups, some restores, and we can step back to see there's a merge and some other data. We can also look at how the current repository looks by clicking on data. Here we can see we have the first backup is merge, which means we can also see the start point of the merge, which in this case is 9 a.m. to then 9 a.m. 35 and then 9 to 9 a.m. 44. We can also see how much data it backed up. We can do this for all the backups we have. So let's move to another scenario. Let's say that for some reason, some of my players have gained admin privilege from the get-go for some reason. And we want to see when this happened and restore the correct data. We can do this by using the examine functionality via the UI. The only thing we need to know is a document that's been corrupted. In this case, for example, let's say add-on 0, and where this document is stored in our backup, in this case, the bucket GameSim sample. If I click examine, it'll take me to this diff view. What I'm seeing here is the difference between the document on the backup, on my first backup and my last backup. We can also change the diff view by to inline if we want to. So we can see on my right side here that my player suddenly has level 9,999 and it's an admin, and this definitely looks wrong. So what I can do is I can step backwards through time to see when this value's changed. If I step to the next one, I can see, well, the levels now look right, but the JSON type still says admin, which is a bit weird. So let's keep going backwards, see if we can find the last one that looks correct. We step backwards again. Oh, this now looks right. The levels look approximately correct, and the player and the JSON type has returned to be a player. So now we can see that the last correct backup we have is the one at 10:14. So let's go and restore that one. Why not? So I have another cluster set up here. So let's restore it to here. As I mentioned before, the backup service lets you do everything CB Backup Manager does. This includes restoring. So what I can do is give it any old cluster I want, give it a user to perform the restore with, select what data I want to restore. So I want to restore it from the start until the last one, which was correct, which we saw was the 10 of the 14. So I click that one. The service also explores every option CB Backup Manager does. So you can select what services to restore. In this case, I'm just going to restore data, as well as any other advanced options like filtering by keys, by values, or mapping data to different buckets. In this case, I'm just going to select it to auto create my buckets. If I click restore, we can see it's running a restore now. We can actually go to our other cluster and see that this bucket has been created now and that some data has been restored. If we go to tasks, we can see the restore and the progress. The progress updates every 5 to 10 seconds. And we can see the restore is moving. Once it's done, if we refresh the history, we can actually see that it restored a certain amount of data. We can take it even further and confirm that the document that we restored was correct. So we click here, we can see this is what we saw before, our last good document. And this is the backup service. We hope that it will help everyone maintain backups and also make the process of restoring in case of failure much easier. Thank you for your time.